I booked a quiet New Year's trip to see my brothers, but the moment I stepped into that motel, something felt deeply wrong. Let me back up. I left my hometown as soon as I turned 18. It wasn't a place you grew up in, it was a place you escaped from. No city lights, no highways, not even a gas station for 30 miles in any direction. Just old houses with peeling paint, dirt roads that turned to mud when it rained, and the same tired faces you'd seen your whole life. The only reason I ever went back was for my two brothers and a small circle of old friends who haven't managed to leave yet. This past New Year's, I decided to visit. Usually, I crashed on one of their couches, but this time, both of them had girlfriends living with them, and I didn't feel like being the awkward third wheel while they cuddled on the couch watching movies. So I looked up the only hotel in town. It didn't even have a real name, just a faded wooden sign that said hotel in block letters, half hidden by overgrown weeds. I figured it would be fine. A bed, a shower, 4 walls. How bad could it be? I arrived close to midnight. The parking lot was completely empty except for one old pickup truck, the kind with rust eating through the wheel wells. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked to the front door. The air smelled like dry grass and something else, something metallic, like old blood or rusted iron. Inside, the lobby was almost dark. A single lamp sat on the front desk, casting a weak yellow circle of light. The rest of the room was swallowed in shadow. Behind the counter, an old man stood up so fast I actually flinched. He looked like he hadn't been expecting anyone, like I had caught him doing something he shouldn't have been doing. He was maybe 60 years old, but his face looked older. Gray stubble covered his jaw, uneven and patchy. His hair hadn't been cut in months, maybe longer. He just stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he said, in a low, rough voice, "Need a room." Not a question, just a statement. I nodded. He reached under the desk, pulled out a metal key with a plastic tag, and handed it to me without saying another word. Then he walked around the counter and led me down a narrow hallway. The carpet was threadbare. The walls were paneled with fake wood that had yellowed with age. Every few feet, a wall sconce flickered weakly, barely pushing back the darkness. He stopped at the last door at the end of the hall, room 9. He pointed at it, then turned and walked away. No enjoy your stay, no breakfast is at 7, just the sound of his boots fading down the hallway until even that disappeared. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small, really small. A double bed sat in the exact center, like someone had measured it. Across from the bed, an old CRT television was bolted to a wooden stand. The air smelled musty, like damp towels left in a washer too long. I told myself it didn't matter. I was only going to sleep here. The rest of the time, I'd be with my family. I took a quick shower. The water pressure was weak, and the pipes groaned like something was stuck inside them. Then I dried off, left my suitcase zipped shut on the floor, and fell onto the bed. Sleep came fast, but it didn't last. I woke up sometime around 3 a.m. At first, I didn't know why. The room was pitch black, the kind of black that feels heavy, like a blanket pressed against your face. Then I heard it, knocking. Not on my door, further down the hallway. Slow, measured thuds. 1, pause. 2, pause. 3, then silence. A few seconds later, more knocking. It sounded like someone was opening and closing an old wooden door, letting it thud softly against the frame, over and over. I laid there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was just another guest, but I hadn't seen anyone else check in. The parking lot had only that one old truck, the old man's truck, probably. The knocking continued for what felt like an hour. Then it stopped, and I fell back to sleep. Morning came gray and cold. I got dressed and walked to the lobby, hoping for coffee. But the lobby was empty. Not just no people, empty. No coffee machine, no chairs, no front desk attendant. The lamp from last night was still there, but it was off now. The whole place felt abandoned. I called out, "Hello?" My voice echoed off the walls. No answer. I shrugged it off. Maybe the old man ran errands in the morning. I left and spent the day with my brothers. We ate lunch at a diner, drove around, laughed about old memories. I almost forgot about the weird motel. I didn't get back until almost 10 p.m. The parking lot looked the same. One truck, empty spaces. But now the lobby lights were off completely. The front door was unlocked, which struck me as strange. I walked inside. The air was colder than it should have been, like someone had left a window open somewhere. I walked down the hallway to my room, locked the door behind me, and changed into sweatpants. And then I heard it again. The knocking. But this time it wasn't at the end of the hallway. It was right outside my wall, right next to my door. My heart started hammering. I crept to the door and pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. Then a soft creak, like someone shifting their weight. I cracked the door open just an inch, just enough to see the hallway. The door to the room next to mine was slightly open. I could see a sliver of darkness inside. And then, from the far end of the hallway, a voice. "Come down to the lobby." It was the old man. His voice was flat, emotionless. I looked toward the end of the hall and saw him standing there, just at the edge of the light. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner. I stood there for a long moment, trying to decide what to do. Maybe he wanted to talk about my payment. Maybe there was a problem with the room. I told myself I was being paranoid, so I walked down the hallway, my footsteps too loud on the thin carpet. When I reached the lobby, it was empty, dark, silent, no old man, no sound of footsteps, nothing. I stood there in the darkness, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. True fear, the kind that starts in your stomach and spreads up through your chest. I turned and hurried back to my room. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept listening for footsteps outside my door, but I never heard anything again. The next day, I met my friends for lunch. I mentioned the motel, the old man, the knocking. They all went quiet. One of them set down his fork and said, "Dude, I thought that place closed down like 2 years ago." Another friend nodded. "Yeah, the owners just left. Couldn't afford the taxes or something. It's been vacant since then." I laughed and said they were wrong. The lights worked, the water worked, someone gave me a key. But they just looked at each other with this expression I couldn't read. Worry, maybe, or pity. That night I drove back to the motel. The parking lot was empty, no truck. I walked to the front door, and this time I noticed things I hadn't seen before. Boards covering some of the windows, a sign on the door that said closed in faded red letters, half torn off, but the door was still unlocked. I walked inside. The lobby was exactly as I had left it, dark, cold, empty. I walked down the hallway to my room, and when I got to the door, I stopped breathing. The door was already open, just a crack, but definitely open. I stood there for what felt like 5 minutes, trying to decide what to do. My suitcase was inside, my wallet, my phone charger. I pushed the door open with my foot and leaned inside. The room was dark. My suitcase was still on the floor, zipped shut. Everything looked normal, but my gut was screaming me to leave. So I ran in, grabbed my suitcase, and ran back out. I didn't even look around. I just bolted down the hallway, my shoes slipping on the carpet, my heart pounding in my ears. Halfway to the lobby, I glanced back over my shoulder. The old man was standing in my doorway, just standing there, staring at me. His face was half in shadow, but I could see his eyes, cold, empty, watching. I didn't stop. I ran to my car, threw my suitcase in the back, and drove straight to my brother's house.
He called the police for me. When officers searched the motel the next morning, they found nothing. No old man, no truck in the lot, no signs that anyone had been there in months. They didn't say it out loud, but I could tell what they were thinking, that I had broken into an abandoned building and hallucinated the whole thing, that I was just another crazy person looking for attention. But I know what I saw, and I know that if I had stayed one more night, I might not have left at all. I stayed at my brother's for the rest of the trip, and I've never gone back to that town since.
This one happened last Christmas. I decided to spend a few days alone at my family's mountain cabin before the rest of my relatives arrived. The cabin had been in my family for decades. A small wooden A-frame with a stone fireplace and big windows that looked out onto nothing but pine trees and snow. It was my favorite place on earth. Quiet, isolated, safe. Or so I thought. I arrived 3 days before Christmas. The sun was already setting when I pulled into the gravel driveway. The sky was bruised purple and orange, and the woods behind the cabin were dark with shadows. Snow covered the ground, not deep, just a thin layer that crunched under my boots. The air smelled like cedar and wood smoke from someone else's chimney miles away. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The cabin was cold, but not damp. My parents had kept it well sealed. I turned on the heat, unpacked my bags, and took a long, hot shower. Then I made a cup of tea, sat by the fireplace, and fell asleep on the couch. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the snow outside in shades of pink and gold. I made a pot of coffee, poured a mug, and decided to take a walk on the old trail behind the cabin. It was a 2-mile loop my family had used for years. Nothing dangerous, just a path through the trees that brought you right back to the front door. I bundled up and headed out. The woods were incredibly quiet. Not the kind of quiet you get in the city, where there's always background noise. This was deep, heavy silence. The only sound was the crunch of my boots in the snow and the occasional whisper of wind through the pine needles. I walked slowly, sipping my coffee, feeling completely at peace. About half a mile in, I noticed something strange. Scuffs in the snow. Not animal tracks. These were too big, too uneven. I crouched down and looked closer. They were shoe prints, fresh ones. The edges were still sharp, not melted or filled with blown snow. I stood up and looked around. Nothing, just trees and snow and gray sky. I told myself it was probably a hunter or someone from another cabin, but the nearest cabin was over a mile away, and this was private property. No trespassing signs were posted every 50 feet. I kept walking, but my peace was gone. Now I was watching the tree line, listening for sounds that weren't there. The prints seemed to follow the trail for a while, then disappear into the woods. I decided to turn back. I didn't want to run into whoever it was out here, alone with no cell service. When the cabin came into view through the trees, I felt a wave of relief. But that relief lasted only a second. There were footprints leading to my front door. Not the ones I had seen before. These were different. They came from the opposite direction, from the back side of the trail loop, and they went straight to the door, then stopped. I looked down at the snow. The prints were fresh, very fresh. They hadn't been there when I left. Someone had been standing at my door minutes ago, while I was in the woods. I spun around, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. No birds, no wind, just silence. I fumbled for my keys, unlocked the door, and practically fell inside. Then I locked it, deadbolted it, and leaned against the wood, breathing hard. My first thought was to call my parents. I dialed my mom's number. She answered on the second ring. I told her what I'd found. She got quiet for a moment, then said, "Get in the car and drive to a hotel. Don't stay there alone." But I didn't want to leave.
This was my family's cabin, my safe place. I told her I'd be fine. I'd just stay inside and keep the doors locked. She didn't sound convinced, but she let me go. The rest of the day was a nightmare of waiting. I sat by the fireplace, drinking coffee after coffee, too wired to eat. Every noise made me jump. Every creak of the old wood made me turn toward the sound. I kept thinking about those footprints, leading to the door, but not leading away. As the sun started to set, the woods outside turned black. The only light in the cabin came from the fire. I sat there in that small circle of warmth, staring at the windows, waiting for a face to appear. Hours passed, nothing. And then, around 9 p.m., a thought hit me like a punch to the chest. I had checked the footprints leading to the door, but I hadn't checked the footprints leading away. What if they didn't lead away? I stood up slowly. My legs felt weak. I walked to the front door, unlocked it, and cracked it open just an inch. Cold air rushed in. I looked down at the snow. The footprints were still there, right up to the threshold, but there were no footprints leaving. None at all. That meant whoever had made those prints was still here, inside, or hiding just outside. But there was nowhere to hide outside. The cabin sat in a clearing. If someone was out there, I would have seen them. So they were inside. I turned around slowly, my back to the open door, my eyes scanning the dark cabin. The firelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Everything looked normal. The couch, the kitchen, the hallway to the bedrooms. And then I heard it. A creak, not from the floor, from the hallway. I leaned forward just enough to see down the dark corridor. My bedroom door was at the end. It was open. And standing in the doorway, half in shadow, was a man. He was tall, wearing dark clothes. His face was pale, expressionless. He was just standing there, staring at me. For one frozen second, neither of us moved. Then he lunged. I didn't think, I just ran. I grabbed my keys off the hook by the door, sprinted to my car, and threw myself inside. I didn't even shut the cabin door behind me. I just started the engine, slammed the gas, and sped down the mountain road. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the cabin was already gone, swallowed by darkness. No lights, no movement, just black. I drove until I found a small town with a police station. I filed a report. The officers drove up to the cabin that night, but the man was gone. They searched the whole property. No sign of forced entry, no sign of anyone. But the next morning, they called me with something. Inside the bedroom closet, they had found scuff marks on the floor, recent ones, and a faint smell, fear, sweat. Someone had been hiding in that closet all day, waiting for me to go to sleep. I never found out who he was, or how he knew I would be there alone, or what he planned to do when I finally closed my eyes. But I think about it every single night, and I have never spent another minute in that cabin. If you made it this far, you know why I double-check every lock now. Like and subscribe to Witnessed Horrors for more true stories that will make you sleep with the lights on. And comment below, what's the creepiest thing you've ever found in a hotel room or a cabin? I read every single one.